The country you are about to hear about was not Nazi Germany. It was not the Soviet Union. It was not a dictatorship hiding behind iron curtains or military parades. It was not a nation that lost a war and had its crimes exposed by foreign prosecutors. It was Switzerland, the wealthiest, most neutral, most photographed, most admired nation on earth. The country the world pointed to when it wanted an example of how civilization was supposed to look. And for over 100 years, its government ran a secret prison system so vast, so methodical, and so deliberately hidden that most Swiss people themselves had no idea it existed. 60,000 human beings were locked away without a single trial. Not in a war, not under foreign occupation, not during a coup or a revolution or a national emergency. In peacetime, in prosperity, in a country with clean streets, punctual trains, and a global reputation for neutrality. No judge reviewed these cases. No jury deliberated. No lawyer stood up in a courtroom and argued for the accused. There were no charges read aloud. There was no moment where a human being was told clearly what they had done wrong. Just a signature from a local official, and your life was over. They called it administrative detention. The people who lived through it called it something else entirely. They called it disappearing. You could be taken for being poor. You could be taken for being an unmarried mother. You could be taken for being a traveler, a drifter, or simply someone a neighbor had quietly reported as difficult. You could be taken for drinking too much, for being unemployed too long, for having children outside of marriage, for being the kind of person that respectable Swiss society had simply decided was inconvenient. The Swiss state did not need evidence. It did not need a court order. It did not need the person standing before it to have committed any crime recognized under any law. It needed only one bureaucrat with a rubber stamp and a name on a list. And between 1930 and 1981, that rubber stamp destroyed tens of thousands of lives in a country the rest of the world was busy admiring from a comfortable distance. This is the story they spent decades trying to make sure you never heard. The system had official names. For the children, it was called Verdingkinder. For the adults, it was called administrative confinement. But underneath both names was the same machine. A machine that identified human beings the Swiss government had quietly decided were undesirable and made them vanish. Into farms, into workhouses, into psychiatric facilities, into labor camps surrounded by stone walls and managed by staff who answered to no oversight that mattered. No appeals process existed for most of this period. No release date was given when you arrived. No one explained how long you would be held or what you needed to do to be considered corrected. People were simply held until an official decided they were no longer a problem. Some waited months. Some waited years. Some grew old inside those walls. Some never came back at all. The victims were not criminals. They were the poorest and most vulnerable people in Swiss society. Single mothers whose only crime was having a child outside of marriage in a canton that considered that a moral failure. Men who had lost their jobs during hard economic years and could not find new work fast enough to satisfy local welfare authorities. Young women reported by neighbors for behavior described in official welfare documents as morally loose. Jewish people, the indigenous traveler community of Switzerland, who had lived on Swiss land for centuries and were now being systematically rounded up, institutionalized, and stripped of their children. The elderly poor, the mentally ill who had no family to advocate for them, the widowed, the displaced, the forgotten. The state did not see these people as citizens deserving protection. It saw them as problems requiring management. And manage them it did, with the same cold efficiency Switzerland had always applied to its banking, its watchmaking, and its international reputation. The institutions they were sent to were not rehabilitation centers. They were not hospitals providing care. They were places of punishment wearing the costume of welfare. Detainees were forced to work in fields, laundries, and production facilities from before sunrise until after dark. The food provided was often barely enough to sustain a human body performing hard physical labor. Beatings were common and almost never recorded officially. The sexual abuse of women and girls inside these facilities was documented by survivors only decades later, when enough of them had found each other and found the courage to speak publicly about what had been done to them. The Swiss state's response was not investigation. It was not criminal prosecution of perpetrators. It was archiving, filing reports, moving papers from one government office to another, and calling the movement of paper a form of accountability. The children suffered in ways that are almost impossible to articulate without sitting with the full weight of what was done to them. Under the Verdingkinder program, the Swiss government forcibly removed thousands of children from their families and leased them to farming households as cheap domestic and agricultural labor. These children cooked, cleaned, plowed fields, tended livestock, and maintained properties in exchange for nothing beyond a roof and a daily meal. Many were beaten regularly by the families assigned to care for them. Many were denied any formal education. Many grew into adults who did not know their own family name, had never met a sibling, and carried injuries both visible and invisible that no government form ever once acknowledged. When the Swiss state was asked about these children decades later, the answer was always consistent. It was a different time. Those 4 words have buried more crimes than any courtroom in history has ever managed to open. The system did not end because someone inside it developed a conscience and refused to keep signing documents. It did not end because a journalist broke the story open before an outraged public. It ended in 1981, quietly, because public attitudes across Europe had shifted enough that the legal framework enabling administrative detention could no longer be defended openly in polite political company. There was no dramatic national moment of abolition. There was no monument erected. There was no minister standing before Parliament naming the dead and the damaged and asking the country to face what it had done. There was simply a law being quietly retired while the people it had consumed for 5 decades were left to find their own way back to something resembling a life. The survivors waited years for an apology. Most waited decades. It was not until 2013 that a sitting Swiss president stood before a microphone and acknowledged publicly that what the state had done to these people was wrong. 80 years after the machine had swallowed its first victims, and the compensation eventually offered was described by survivor after survivor as an insult wrapped in official language. 25,000 Swiss francs. For years of imprisonment without trial. For childhoods taken by government order. For families separated and never reunited. For abuse that left survivors unable to sleep, unable to trust, and unable to build the ordinary life that every human being is supposed to be permitted to reach for. 25,000 francs. A handshake, and a press release. Here is what makes this story impossible to set aside once you have heard it. Switzerland did not run this system in secret because it was ashamed. It ran this system in secret because it was confident. Confident that the people it was imprisoning had no political power, no media access, no international allies, and no voice capable of reaching beyond the walls of the institution that had consumed them. It was not fear of exposure that kept this machine running for 50 years. It was the absolute certainty that the victims would never be believed by anyone who mattered. That is the most dangerous form of injustice that exists. Not the kind that hides in genuine darkness. The kind that operates in full daylight, behind respectable stone facades, with official budgets and government stamps, and the quiet collective agreement of an entire society that certain people simply do not matter enough to protect. 60,000 people. In Switzerland. Without a single trial. If you are still watching this right now, you already know something that most people scrolling their feeds today will never stop long enough to learn. And knowledge like this was exactly what systems like this were built to prevent from ever spreading. So share this video right now. Not after the next one. Right now. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching from today. And tell us what you want us to uncover next. Do you want more buried histories from Europe, where nations built on civilization quietly destroyed their own people behind respectable doors? Or do you want us to go to Africa, where forgotten wars, colonial machines, and deliberately erased histories left wounds so deep that no history book has ever found the courage to fully open them? Tell us in the comments. Because either way, we are not finished. And neither is the truth.